As we have explained in our short video update, it is our goal to explain virtually every aspect of the solid facts surrounding the assassination of President John F. Kennedy and all the players involved in that tragic event. No one can be more important to this scenario than one Lee Harvey Oswald, the alleged assassin of the president. It is for that very purpose that this episode has been created. We will be examining in great detail the life of Lee Harvey Oswald to the extent that available information is accessible to us here at America Under Audit. So we now present to you the life of Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald was born on October 18, 1939, in New Orleans, Louisiana, to Marguerite Frances Claverie Oswald and Robert Edward Oswald. His father, Robert Edward Oswald, died of a heart attack 2 months before Lee was born. Lee had two older brothers, Robert Oswald and his half-brother, John Pick, from Marguerite's first marriage to Edward John Pick. Marguerite, Oswald's mother, sent his older brothers Robert and John to live at an orphanage when Lee was a baby. She wanted to send Lee as well, but he was too young to be accepted. So Lee lived with his mom until he was 3 years old. At that time, at the tender age of 3, Marguerite sent Lee to live with his brothers at the orphanage the day after Christmas in 1942. In 1944, 2 years after she had dropped all of her children off at the orphanage, Marguerite Oswald checked out the 3 of them from that orphanage and regained custody of them. She then moved with her 3 sons from New Orleans, Louisiana to Dallas, Texas. The move was because she had started a relationship with Edwin Excel, who lived in Dallas. On May 7, 1945, Marguerite and Excel were married. In October of 1945, the Excels moved from Dallas to Benbrook, a suburb southwest of Fort Worth. They rented a home on Granbury Road, and this is where we have the first evidentiary anomaly in the background of Lee Harvey Oswald. As a 6-year-old, Oswald was enrolled in 1st grade at Benbrook Common School, where he attended school from October 31st of 1945 until January 15th of 1946. His enrollment form for Benbrook Common School lists the Oswald's address while he attended school there in Benbrook, and the Warren Report stated they lived on Granbury Road as the Worth Hotel and 748 Ewing. And it may well make some sense that a hotel would be an initial contact address when the Excel family first moved into town and were searching for a proper place to live. But there seems to be no plausible explanation for how 7408 Ewing could have been listed as their address. And what is even more puzzling is that the 7408 Ewing address isn't just some random address. It's the address for the house that the Oswalds lived in, starting in August of 1948. This date is a full 2 years after Lee was no longer enrolled at the Benbrook Common School. Why would a 1945 school contact form list the address of a house the Oswalds wouldn't be living at until years later as their current address in 1945? Is this just some odd coincidence? That certainly may well be a possibility, but this reporter finds this anomaly quite unusual. On July 7, 1947, while she was still married to Edwin Exo, Marguerite Oswald bought a new house located at 101 San Saba in Benbrook. Georgia Bell lived next door to Marguerite at 100 San Saba. Bell moved into her home in July of 1947, very near the same time Marguerite bought the house at 101 San Saba. Bell remembered that Marguerite Oswald had very few items of clothing and did not own a car. She would obtain rides to do a grocery shopping from yet another neighbor named Lucille Hubbard. Bell remembered that Hubbard's son played with Lee Oswald around the neighborhood. The Oswalds moved out of 101 San Saba roughly around Thanksgiving in 1947. With this San Saba address, yet another question arises regarding the timeline of the houses that Lee Harvey Oswald lived in as a young child. If he lived at 101 San Saba from July until November of 1947, then he should have been attending the nearby Benbrook Common School, which was a mere half-mile away. But during the fall of 1947, Oswald was listed as attending Lily B. Clayton Elementary School in Fort Worth. This school is more than 10 miles away from the address at 101 San Saba. Oswald's half-brother John Pick told the Warren Commission that during the entire summer of 1947, the family lived at 1505 8th Avenue in Fort Worth. John Pick said he remembers this because he worked at the nearby Tech Gold ice cream parlor. This house, located at 1505 8th Avenue, was less than half a mile away from the Lily B. Clayton Elementary School. The proximity of 1505 8th Avenue to the Lily B. Clayton Elementary School and the ice cream parlor makes it somewhat unclear as to how the Oswald family could have resided at 101 San Saba simultaneously during the late summer and early fall of 1947. The Summary of Addresses of Lee Harvey Oswald in the Warren Commission CE 11963 doesn't even mention the house located at 101 San Saba. It lists that the Oswald family lived at 1505 8th Avenue for the entire year of 1947. The problem with this assessment is that there is actual proof that Marguerite Oswald bought the property at 101 San Saba in the form of the Tarrant County land record and the statements from the neighbor Georgia Bell and another neighbor who had semi-frequent contact with Marguerite Otis Carleton. In addition to those facts, there is also an FBI report on 101 San Saba that states that Marguerite Oswald occupied 101 San Saba before moving to 3300 Willing. This FBI report was written within 48 hours of the assassination. This reporter thought it prudent to get further clarification regarding this period of time, so I examined the Warren Commission testimony of Robert Oswald to discover what he testified to during his Warren Commission testimony. Unfortunately, when counsel Albert Jenner began to ask Robert questions regarding the summer of 1947, Commissioner Allen Dulles called for an adjournment. Allen Dulles, it should be noted, had recently been fired by the then former President John Kennedy because of his nefarious shenanigans while he was the head of the CIA. Allen Dulles was a ruthless and dangerous man. When the interview resumed, on the record, Jenner began this session with, quote, "This brought us through the summer of 1948, I believe," which Robert Oswald confirmed. Now, this omission, by skipping the summer of 1947, does not really prove anything. However, it does bring forth additional questions surrounding all of the Warren Commission testimony by not only Robert Oswald but others as well. Marguerite Oswald was not asked about the 101 San Saba property, and didn't mention it at all during her Warren Commission testimony. John Pick wasn't any help either. He told the Warren Commission, quote, "I don't know nothing about San Saba." On June 15th of 1948, Marguerite's divorce from Excel was finalized. Months earlier, she had caught Excel with his mistress. After the divorce, John Pick and Robert Oswald were sent back to the Chamberlain Hunt Military Academy in Port Gibson, Mississippi. Marguerite and Lee then moved to 3300 Willing Avenue, which required Lee to transfer to the George Clark Elementary School, where he finished second grade. Oswald then attended Arlington Heights Elementary School for his third grade year, while living at 3300 Willing. There is no indication from the records why Oswald switched schools from George Clark Elementary to Arlington Heights Elementary when he didn't move. On September 15th of 1948, Marguerite, Lee, Robert, and John Pick moved into a house located at 7408 Ewing. This is the same address that mysteriously appeared on Oswald's first grade records at Benbrook Common School 2 years earlier. The next year, Oswald once again moved to yet another new school, this time to Wrigley West Elementary to attend fourth grade. Lee Oswald then had the most consistent stint in his academic career, completing 3 years in a row at the same school, Wrigley West Elementary, and graduated from the 6th grade in May of 1951. In August of 1952, after Robert had already left home to join the Marines and John Pick was in the Coast Guard, Marguerite uprooted Lee from Fort Worth and moved to New York City. Marguerite testified that she wanted to see her son John, who was stationed in the Coast Guard there. She also wanted to meet John's new wife and her new grandchild. At first, Marguerite and Lee stayed with John and his wife and their newborn baby in a tiny Upper East Side apartment. One day, during this time period, Pick's wife Marge asked Lee to turn down the television, and he told her no, and then threatened her with a knife. Then, when Marguerite entered the room and intervened, 12-year-old Lee punched her in the face. After this incident, Marguerite and Lee were asked to move out of the apartment, and after that, they briefly lived in a one-room basement apartment in the Bronx. There is considerable conflicting evidence in the record about where Oswald went to school for 7th grade while he was in New York. Marguerite told the Warren Commission that she had enrolled Lee in a Lutheran school that took him an hour each way to get to the school and get back home after school. However, John Pick told the Warren Commission that his mother had enrolled Lee in a public school located on either 89th or 90th Street between 3rd Avenue and 2nd Avenue. Pick also told the FBI the same thing he told the Warren Commission. The closest school in New York City, as described by John Pick, was the vocational school PS 66, located at 88th and 1st Avenue. There are no records in existence that show that Oswald attended that school. There are also no records from the Trinity Lutheran School in the Bronx showing that he attended school there. On one hand, it's hard to fathom that someone would have their 7th grade child take the subway an hour each way every day to go to school. But this is, after all, a woman who thought it was okay to use an orphanage as a long-term babysitter for her children, even when one of those children was only 3 years old. Ultimately, there are no records of Oswald's attendance for the month of September in 1952. After Marguerite and Lee moved out of John Pick's apartment, they lived at 1455 Sheridan Apartment F in the Bronx. Lee then enrolled at PS 117 in the Bronx on September 30th, 1952. This raises the question of why did Marguerite and Lee move all the way to the Bronx, very near to the Lutheran school that he supposedly traveling an hour each way to attend, only to then enroll in a different public school once he actually lived nearby at Public School 117 when he was in the 7th grade. Lee Harvey Oswald began to consistently miss large blocks of school days for the first time. He attended only 16 days and missed a total of 48 days at PS 117. These large chunks of time missed at school led to a truancy hearing with school administrators on January 14, 1953, when Marguerite was told that she had to take action to get Lee to go to school or the Board of Education would. She withdrew him from PS 117, and Lee's last day at PS 117 was 2 days later on January 16th. Around this time, Lee and Marguerite moved yet again to apartment 3C at 325 East 179th Street in the Bronx. Their new apartment was in the PS 44 school district. From January 16th, which was his last day at PS 117 until the end of the school year, Oswald attended this new school, PS 44, but he only went a total of 16 out of 64 days, or 25% of the time. On April 15th of 1953, a follow-up hearing was held at the Bronx Children's Court regarding Oswald's truancy. Oswald admitted to skipping school and was immediately remanded to a stay at the youth house, which is basically like juvenile hall, for 3 weeks of psychiatric evaluation. During this time at the youth house, we have 2 more unexplainable discrepancies in the record. First, Marguerite Oswald told the Warren Commission that when Lee was taken into custody for excessive truancy, he was placed in the Warwick Home for Boys, which she says is an old home in Brooklyn. But the historical record reflects that Oswald was actually placed in the youth house, which is in Lower Manhattan. I can see how witnesses might forget certain details, but it sounds as though Marguerite is talking about a completely different place. Maybe that point amounts to nothing at all. Secondly, and even more confusing, is the fact that on April 16th, when Oswald was already detained at the youth house, Officer Felicia Spritzer, who worked out of the Bathgate Avenue station in the Bronx, picked up a young boy and charged him with truancy. The boy was identified as Lee Harvey Oswald. Officer Spritzer then served him with the outstanding warrant for truancy. However, This scenario is physically impossible because Lee Harvey Oswald was already being held at the youth house on April 16th. While Oswald was at the youth house, he saw a psychiatrist named Dr. Radis Hartog, who diagnosed Oswald with personality pattern disturbance with schizoid features and passive-aggressive tendencies. Despite the diagnosis, Dr. Hartog did not recommend that Oswald be placed in an institution. Then in May of 1953, after spending 3 weeks at the youth house, Oswald was released and returned to school at PS 44, where his grades improved for the remainder of the 7th grade school year. On September 14th of 1953, Lee entered the 8th grade at PS 44. On September 24th, Marguerite called Lee's probation officer, John Caro, to tell him that she didn't think it was necessary for Lee to attend a hearing that was scheduled that day because, quote, he had been elected as class president, was now well adjusted. Caro then followed up with the school, who wrote a report that said, quote, he did little work, wouldn't support the flag, and spent most of his time sailing paper airplanes around the room. Ultimately, in hearings on October 29th and November 19th, Judge Dudley Schitzer determined that Oswald was in need of treatment. Marguerite had no intention of allowing the New York juvenile system to place Lee in custody again. She told the court on December 17th that the family was moving to New Jersey. And just like that, Oswald's time in the New York juvenile system was over as soon as he was out of their jurisdiction. In reality, Marguerite and Lee didn't move to New Jersey. They went back to New Orleans. According to the Warren Report, Marguerite and Lee Oswald left New York City to return to New Orleans in January of 1954. And, as we have just discussed, there is a lot of evidence to support the idea that Oswald was in New York City until early 1954. In addition to all of the children's court hearings in the fall of 1953, we also know that Marguerite and Lee were in New York from Marguerite's employment records. She worked at Lady Orva Hosiery until December 26th of 1953. Also, according to the school health records, Lee was sick at school on January 4th at PS 44, which means he still had to be in New York at that time. There is a strong record to demonstrate that Oswald stayed in New York until early January of 1954, and that fact is precisely why it is quite strange that there is also evidence to show that Lee Harvey Oswald was in North Dakota, of all places, in the summer of 1953 for a prolonged period of time. And there is also evidence of Oswald attending Beauregard Junior High School in New Orleans in the fall of 1953, when in fact the evidence points to him being physically in New York City. Can this get any wackier than this, my friends? 12-year-old Henry Timmer was staying with his grandparents in Stanley, North Dakota for the summer of 1953. According to a December 27, 1963 FBI report, Timmer came forward to the FBI to tell them that he remembered meeting Lee Harvey Oswald that summer when he was riding his bike in a local park with some friends of his and saw Oswald there at the park. Oswald introduced himself as Harvey. Timmer said that he hung out with Oswald about 6 different times during that summer in 1953. Oswald told the boys that he was a gang member in New York City and talked about gang fights where members would use razor blades stuck in potatoes as weapons. These were some wilder-than-life stories for these North Dakota boys, and Timmer said that he remembered him because he was the first person he ever met from the big city. He also remembered that Oswald's bike had no chain guard on it, and he always got his pants stuck in the chain. Notably, Timmer says that 14-year-old Harvey Oswald talked about communism and showed him a booklet about Karl Marx. He even told Timmer once, "Someday I'm going to kill the president, and that will show them." Timmer told his mom about this, and he was no longer allowed to play with Harvey Oswald. When Timmer saw Oswald's photo in the newspaper after the assassination, he was certain that it was the same person he had met in Stanley, North Dakota, 10 years earlier. The problem with Timmer's story is that the FBI checked Marguerite's employment records from Lady Orva Hosiery in New York City, and she worked there continuously from May until December of 1953. There was no pay period that she missed or that she was noted as being on vacation. That means that Marguerite and Lee could not have been in North Dakota during the summer of 1953. So, is Timmer just mistaken? Maybe he is. But why would some off-the-wall person say that he had met a kid named Harvey Oswald while spending the summer with his grandparents in Stanley, North Dakota? Was he just trying to grab a glimmer of the spotlight associated with all the attention Lee Harvey Oswald was getting at the time? However, if that wasn't enough to confuse you altogether, there's one more piece of evidence that indicates that Oswald may have briefly been in North Dakota in the summer of 1953. Oswald gave an interview to Eileen Mosby when he was in Moscow in 1959. She was asking him about his attempted defection to the Soviet Union. Mosby took handwritten notes about where Oswald said he lived during this interview. In her notes, she wrote the letters ND after NY when discussing the chronology of where Oswald had lived. However, Eileen Mosby retyped the notes for the Warren Commission and changed ND to NO for New Orleans. It isn't clear whether this was a typo or if it was intentional. The Warren Report's position is that Oswald never resided in North Dakota at any time during his life. Now, there is not a lot of evidence to show that Oswald actually was in New Orleans in the fall of 1953, but the one piece of evidence that exists is pretty hard to explain. On page 817 of Warren Commission Volume 22, you'll find Lee Harvey Oswald's 1953 and 1954 school year report card at Beauregard Junior High School in New Orleans. The first line shows the fall semester, and it notes that Oswald was there for 89 days. But remember, we know that there is ample evidence of Oswald living in New York until January of 1954. He could not have been in New Orleans for 89 days in the fall of 1953. The easiest explanation is that this document must simply be wrong. But it's a report card for 4 semesters, and it covers the fall of 1953 straight through to the spring of 1955. This is over 2 years of school. It seems illogical that someone could get the number of days in the fall semester so patently wrong if they are record keepers for a school district. It certainly is possible, but it seems unlikely. Assuming, of course, that this is a true and accurate document, the Beauregard Junior High School report card showing that Oswald was present for 89 days in the fall of 1953 is an evidentiary anomaly that this reporter finds quite puzzling. All of Oswald's original juvenile detention records, psychiatric records, and school records disappeared while they were in the custody of the FBI. There are only copies of those records available now. In a near-mirror image of circumstance, all of the Beauregard Junior High School records are also missing, leaving the world with only copies. With all of the evidentiary anomalies and outright flubs along the way, the FBI has opened itself up to a wide swath of criticism from the research community. Many claim that the FBI has altered the copies, being that the FBI keeps losing all the original documents, and there is no way to determine what the original documents may have shown because they have vanished, like some kind of magician's trick, and these mishaps are far too extensive to be mere coincidences. This was done on purpose. Yes, folks, you heard that right. I said that this was all done on purpose by those fine folks at the FBI, and they should be completely ashamed of themselves for scamming the American people in the manner with which they have. This reporter finds this to be a total disgrace to solid investigative practices, and the whole lot of them should turn in their badges.